There's something deeply unsettling about watching someone panic when their phone dies. You know that look, the sudden widening of eyes, the frantic search for a charger, the visible anxiety that spreads across their face like they've just lost their lifeline to existence itself. But here's what's truly fascinating. It's not really about the phone at all. We're witnessing something far more profound, the terror of being alone with our own thoughts. Somewhere along the way, we've forgotten one of humanity's most essential skills, the ability to simply be with ourselves. Not entertained, not distracted, not consuming content or scrolling through feeds, but genuinely, completely alone. This isn't just about digital addiction or social media dependence. This is about something much deeper, a fundamental disconnection from our own inner landscape that's creating what I can only describe as a silent epidemic. An entire generation of people who've become strangers to themselves, who've lost the capacity for solitude, and who mistake being alone for being lonely. And the consequences? They're more devastating than we realize. Let me explain what I mean by this epidemic of forgotten solitude. This isn't about introversion versus extroversion, and it's certainly not about social isolation or loneliness. Those are entirely different phenomena. What I'm talking about is the lost art of comfortable aloneness, the ability to sit with yourself without immediately reaching for stimulation, distraction, or external validation. True solitude is not the absence of people, it's the presence of yourself. It's that rare state where you can exist in your own company without the constant need to fill the silence, check your notifications, or escape into entertainment. It's the difference between being alone and being lonely. One is a choice, the other is a wound. But here's where it gets complex. We've created a world that actively works against solitude. Every surface has a screen, every moment has a soundtrack, every silence has been filled with notifications. We've built an entire economy around capturing and monetizing human attention. And solitude? Well, solitude doesn't generate revenue. The result is a generation that's forgotten how to be bored, how to sit in stillness, how to process thoughts without immediately sharing them. We've become like tuning forks that can only vibrate when struck by external forces, constantly reactive, never truly at rest. This isn't about being antisocial or withdrawing from the world, quite the opposite. People who've mastered solitude often form the deepest, most authentic connections with others. They bring a fullness to their relationships because they've learned to be complete within themselves first. They don't need others to fill their emptiness because they've discovered they were never empty to begin with. But for those who've forgotten this skill, every moment alone becomes a moment to escape from, every silence becomes something to fill, and every opportunity for self-reflection becomes an invitation to anxiety. The first danger of this epidemic is what I call the constant escape. When we lose the ability to be alone with ourselves, we become perpetual refugees from our own minds, always seeking the next distraction, the next stimulation, the next way to avoid the discomfort of our own thoughts. I've watched this play out in countless ways. The person who can't eat a meal without watching something on their phone. The individual who falls asleep to Netflix every night because silence feels too heavy. The professional who schedules back-to-back meetings not because they're necessary, but because empty calendar slots feel like voids that need filling. But here's what's truly insidious about constant escape. It prevents us from processing our experiences. Think of solitude as the digestive system of the soul. Just as our bodies need time to break down and absorb nutrients from food, our minds need quiet time to process, integrate, and make meaning from our experiences. When we're always consuming, whether it's content, conversations, or stimulation, we never give ourselves the space to truly digest what we've experienced. Emotions remain unprocessed, insights remain unformed, and wisdom remains unintegrated. We become like someone who's constantly eating but never actually absorbing nutrients. I remember observing a woman on a train once. Over the course of a 2-hour journey, she never once looked out the window or sat in silence. She moved seamlessly from her phone to her laptop to her headphones to a book and back to her phone. There was something almost frantic about it, as if stopping the consumption might allow something uncomfortable to surface. And that's exactly what she was afraid of. Because when we've forgotten how to be alone, solitude doesn't feel peaceful, it feels threatening. Our own thoughts become strangers we'd rather not meet. Our emotions become weather systems we'd rather not experience. Our dreams and fears and hopes become voices we'd rather not hear. The tragedy is that in avoiding these inner experiences, we also avoid the profound gifts that solitude offers: creativity, clarity, self-knowledge, and the deep peace that comes from being genuinely comfortable in your own skin. We trade the richness of inner life for the shallow comfort of constant distraction. The second danger is perhaps even more subtle: the loss of authentic decision-making. When we can't be alone with ourselves, we lose access to our own inner compass. Every choice becomes influenced by external voices, social media opinions, or the need for immediate validation rather than emerging from our own deep knowing. Think about the last major decision you made. How much of that decision was truly yours, and how much was shaped by what others might think, what you've seen online, or what seems socially acceptable? This isn't about being influenced by wise counsel. That's healthy. This is about losing touch with your own authentic desires and values because you've never spent enough quiet time to discover what they actually are. I've noticed this particularly in younger generations who've grown up with constant connectivity. They often struggle with questions like, "What do I actually want?" or "What brings me joy?" Not because they're indecisive, but because they've never had enough solitude to explore these questions deeply. Every preference has been crowdsourced, every opinion has been influenced by algorithms, every desire has been shaped by what they've seen others desire. The result is a kind of existential homelessness, people who feel disconnected from their own lives because they're living according to external scripts rather than internal truth. They make decisions that look good on paper or sound impressive when shared, but feel hollow in the living. I once knew a young professional who changed career paths 3 times in 5 years, each time choosing based on what seemed exciting on social media or what impressed their network. It wasn't until they spent a month in relative isolation, no social media, minimal external input, that they realized they'd never actually asked themselves what kind of work would feel meaningful to them personally. This disconnection from authentic choice-making creates a peculiar kind of suffering. People find themselves living lives that look successful from the outside but feel empty from the inside. I once knew a young professional who changed career paths 3 times in 5 years, each time choosing based on what seemed exciting on social media or what impressed their network. It wasn't until they spent a month in relative isolation, no social media, minimal external input, that they realized they'd never actually asked themselves what kind of work would feel meaningful to them personally. This disconnection from authentic choice-making creates a peculiar kind of suffering. People find themselves living lives that look successful from the outside but feel empty from the inside. They achieve goals they never really wanted, pursue relationships that don't truly fulfill them, and make choices that serve their image rather than their soul. The antidote to this isn't isolation or rejection of all external input. It's the cultivation of enough inner stillness to hear your own voice above the noise. It's developing the capacity to sit with questions without immediately seeking answers from Google, friends, or social media. It's learning to trust the wisdom that emerges only in silence. The third, and perhaps most profound danger, is the erosion of our capacity for deep presence, both with ourselves and with others. When we've forgotten how to be alone, we also forget how to be truly with people. We become like someone who's never learned to swim, trying to teach others how to dive. Here's what I mean. Genuine presence requires the ability to be comfortable with silence, with pauses, with the spaces between words. It requires the capacity to sit with another person's emotions without immediately trying to fix, change, or escape them. But if we can't even sit with our own discomfort, how can we possibly hold space for someone else's? I've watched this play out in relationships where people are physically together but emotionally scattered. Couples sitting at dinner, both on their phones. Friends hanging out but constantly documenting the experience rather than living it. Parents with their children present in body but absent in attention because they've lost the ability to simply be without doing. The tragedy is that these moments of distracted togetherness often feel worse than being alone. There's something particularly painful about being with someone who's not really there. It highlights our isolation rather than alleviating it. We end up feeling lonely in company, which is perhaps the most devastating form of loneliness there is. But the impact goes even deeper. When we can't be present with others, we rob them of one of the most fundamental human needs, the experience of being truly seen and heard. Think about the last time someone gave you their complete, undivided attention. No phone, no distractions, no agenda. Just pure presence. How rare was that experience? How powerful did it feel? This kind of presence is becoming extinct, and with it, our capacity for genuine intimacy. We're creating relationships that are wide but shallow, connected but not intimate, busy but not meaningful. We know more about each other's daily activities through social media than ever before, but we understand less about each other's inner worlds. The irony is profound. In our attempt to stay connected to everyone through technology, we've lost the ability to truly connect with anyone, including ourselves. We've traded depth for breadth, presence for productivity, being for doing. And perhaps most tragically, we're raising a generation of children who are learning that love looks like divided attention, that relationships are performed rather than experienced, and that the discomfort of silence is something to be avoided rather than embraced. I once knew a woman named Sarah who embodied this epidemic in the most heartbreaking way. She was successful by every external measure: a marketing executive at a prestigious firm, beautiful apartment in the city, active social life, thousands of followers on Instagram. But there was something about her that always seemed slightly frantic, as if she was running from something invisible. Sarah's days were orchestrated to eliminate any possibility of silence. She woke up to podcasts, commuted while making calls, worked in an open office filled with constant chatter, attended networking events most evenings, and fell asleep watching Netflix. Even her weekends were packed with activities, brunches, fitness classes, and social gatherings. The first time I suggested we sit in a coffee shop without our phones just to talk, she looked at me like I'd proposed something dangerous. "What if someone needs to reach me?" she asked, but I could see the real fear in her eyes. It wasn't about missing messages, it was about facing whatever might arise in the silence. When she finally agreed, something remarkable happened. For the first 10 minutes, she was visibly uncomfortable, checking her watch, adjusting her position, making small talk to fill the quiet moments. But gradually, as we sat together without the buffer of devices, something shifted. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders relaxed, and she began to speak about things she'd never shared before. She told me about the constant anxiety that hummed beneath her successful exterior, about how she'd lost touch with what she actually enjoyed versus what looked good on social media, about how lonely she felt despite being surrounded by people constantly. "I don't even know who I am when no one's watching," she admitted, and the vulnerability in her voice was stunning. That conversation led to others, and slowly, Sarah began experimenting with solitude. She started with just 5 minutes of sitting quietly in the morning, no phone, no agenda. At first, it felt excruciating. Her mind raced, her body fidgeted, and every instinct told her to reach for distraction. But she persisted. Over months, something beautiful began to emerge. She discovered that she actually loved reading, not self-help books or industry publications, but poetry and fiction that fed her soul. She realized she enjoyed cooking when it wasn't being documented for social media. She found that her most creative ideas came not during brainstorming sessions, but during quiet walks without podcasts or music. Most importantly, she began to develop what she called inner friendship, the ability to enjoy her own company, to find her own thoughts interesting, to sit with her emotions without immediately trying to change them. She started making decisions based on what felt right to her, rather than what would impress others. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it was profound. Sarah became more present in her relationships, more authentic in her choices, and more peaceful in her daily life. She didn't become antisocial or withdraw from the world, quite the opposite. She brought a fullness to her interactions because she was no longer trying to fill an inner emptiness through external connection. So how do we reclaim this lost art of solitude? How do we remember how to be alone without being lonely? The path forward requires both courage and patience, because we're essentially learning to befriend ourselves again after years of treating our own company as something to escape from. The first step is recognizing that discomfort with solitude is normal. It's a skill that atrophies when not used. Just as someone who hasn't exercised in years will feel uncomfortable during their first workout, someone who hasn't practiced solitude will feel restless, anxious, or bored when they first attempt it. This discomfort isn't a sign that something's wrong, it's a sign that something's healing. Start small and be consistent. 5 minutes of phone-free silence each morning, a walk without podcasts or music, eating one meal a day without any entertainment. The goal isn't to become a hermit, it's to develop comfort with your own presence so you can bring that fullness to your relationships with others. Create what I call sacred pauses throughout your day, moments where you consciously choose presence over productivity, being over doing. This might be the pause between finishing one task and starting another, the moment before you check your phone, or the space between hearing a question and formulating your response. Learn to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected. Solitude is the joy of feeling complete. One is a wound that needs healing. The other is a gift that needs cultivating. When you feel the urge to escape into distraction, pause and ask yourself, am I running from loneliness or avoiding solitude? Most importantly, approach this practice with compassion rather than judgment. Our culture has trained us to fear silence, to equate busyness with importance, and to mistake constant stimulation for aliveness. Unlearning these patterns takes time. Remember that the goal isn't to eliminate all external input or become completely self-reliant. Healthy solitude actually enhances our capacity for meaningful connection. When we're comfortable being alone, we choose relationships from fullness rather than neediness, from desire rather than desperation. The paradox of solitude is that it makes us better companions to ourselves and to others. When we're no longer running from our own thoughts and feelings, we can be present for someone else's. When we've learned to enjoy our own company, we can offer genuine rather than needy love. And that, my friends, is perhaps the most beautiful irony of all. In learning to be alone, we discover we're never truly alone. In befriending ourselves, we become better friends to others. In embracing solitude, we create space for deeper connection. The epidemic of forgotten solitude isn't permanent, it's simply a skill we need to remember. Every moment offers us the opportunity to choose presence over distraction, depth over surface, being over doing. Every pause is a chance to come home to ourselves. Imagine a world where people are comfortable in their own skin, where silence isn't something to be filled but something to be savored, where decisions emerge from inner wisdom rather than external pressure. Imagine relationships built on presence rather than performance, conversations that include comfortable pauses, and a generation that knows the difference between being alone and being lonely. This isn't just possible, it's essential. Because in a world that profits from our distraction, choosing solitude becomes a radical act. In a culture that equates busyness with worth, embracing stillness becomes revolutionary. In a society that fears silence, learning to love our own company becomes a form of rebellion. The path back to ourselves is always available. It requires only the courage to stop running and the willingness to remember that the person we've been avoiding, ourselves, might actually be worth getting to know. After all, you're going to be spending the rest of your life with yourself. Isn't it time you became friends?